Hi, everyone. Doc T here with another episode of the Horse Advocate Podcast. Thanks for joining me. Today, I'm going to do something that some people have said they've enjoyed in the past. I'm going to read a magazine, a horse magazine. This one is Equus, the summer edition of 2022. And I'm going to go over some of the articles in here and give you my 2 cents on them. I find it interesting that the same people are advertising in here. Almost all of them are nutrition or veterinary related, and there are certainly a ton of advertising for fly control, which I think is kind of great. It is summertime. All right, so I'm going to flip through this page by page. It said, how's your feeding supply holding up? And I thought that was an interesting article that talked about in supply chain problems, they are wondering how well you're getting your horses fed. And that was, it's always an issue with some things like hay. I'm not a big fan of grain, so if your horse can't get grain, I'm happy for that. But it did say on a pop quiz at the bottom, said all you can eat, given ample pasture. The question goes, given ample pasture, how many hours a day will a typical horse spend grazing? They have 4 options. A is between 1 and 4 hours. B is 8 to 12. C is 13 to 18. And D, more than 18. And that's interesting because there are so many factors involved in what's causing a horse to want to eat, including what is out there. In other words, if it's winter and there's very little sugar in the pasture, they're going to start to lose their body fat, and they may or may not want to eat more. It depends on a lot of things. If you're going to supply them with hay, they're going to eat more hay. If you don't supply them with hay, they're going to convert over using body fat, and they're going to find that they're more satiated, so they're going to eat less. So I think this is a pretty misleading thing. It also depends on how much protein the horse is eating. If you believe in the protein leverage hypothesis that determines that your hunger is based on whether or not you've eaten enough amino acids in the day, and the more protein you eat, the more likely it is that you're satiated. Their answer was C, between 13 and 18 hours. The equine gut is designed to process a near continuous supply of chewed grass, and ample grazing is good for the digestive health. I'm just like, okay, that's just perpetuating without looking into and understanding what drives a horse to eating. And I find that horses in the winter eat a whole lot less, that they don't have it available, and they do just fine. So I'm going to keep flipping through here. And here's one on page 14, a better way to evaluate loss of muscle mass. They talk about the muscle atrophy scoring system, or MASS. Enables owners and veterinarians to make more objective assessments of muscle mass in horses. And that's fine. Neutrina came out with a top line score. I've talked about it at ABCD, with the muscle loss starting in the withers and moving back through the croup and into the rump, with that being a D score. And we see top line disappearing all the time in older horses. And I've gone over why this is happening. It's through absorption of the proteins of the muscles over time as the horse gets older. So this is interesting. I'll quote a couple of things. Like the BCS, that's the scoring system called the body condition score, where they score horses on a scale of 1 to 9, 1 being on death's doorstep, 5 being perfect, 9 being obese. You throw them in a pond, they float like a fishing bob. They're so fat. So they wanted to come up with some other score, and it's really hard to give an assessment of muscle mass when it's covered up in fat. It's just almost impossible. In hogs, swine, they use an ultrasound to look at back fat, and that's important. But the muscling underneath that is just as important because they're trying to sell meat. So they ultrasound, they look at the fat on the back, but we don't do that in horses, and a lot of people aren't willing to pay for that. But basically, the mass system causes or has the people evaluate 4 different places Let me see if I can find them. It was right here. I know it was right here. Okay. Hold on, everybody. They said in older horses and those with pituitary pars intermediate dysfunction, also known as Cushing's disease, a routine muscle atrophy evaluation is crucial to identifying horses that have lost muscle and to subsequently investigate the cause and to establish a treatment plan. I've been telling you guys for years, you want to treat this, stop feeding excess sugar and allow the horse to get mitochondrial flexibility and make sure that they have protein in there so they're not continually resorbing the protein in their body to feed their sugar loss due to insulin. So let's see. It seeks to address the specific pitfalls. It says it measures 4 target areas: the back, the neck, the belly, and the hind region. And they're going to assign that whether it's lean or fat categories. And they basically said that in the research of getting some people to assess this mass score, they found that everywhere except the belly, there was a lot of agreement between investigators who were given the score. There was a lot of agreement between what they found independently from each other. So they basically said next to the abdominal fat. Now remember that belly score of the abdomen, one of the quick things you're going to see in horses that are protein deficient and you start adding protein is you'll see the loss of the belly. The hay belly goes away because the abdominal muscles become stronger and it helps tuck that in. It's one of the features that you'll find in a protein deficient horse being fed a good amount of high quality protein. Then in about 4 weeks, you'll see the belly go away. So I think they're looking at this score, trying to assess muscle loss and then having you go forward into these diseases and trying to treat the diseases. And I'm saying those diseases and the muscle loss are all going back to the same thing. So just go to that and you'll be fine. All right, here's another article called Surprising Findings About Parasites. And Dr. Martin Nielsen out of Kentucky, he is the big vocal movement behind all parasite studies in horses. I love listening to him because he's kind of funny. He's also confident, and he'll say it exactly like he sees it. And they were looking at this to understand if the fecal egg counts would vary according to season. And they said, no, it doesn't. And that goes against what a lot of other people say, that the fecal shedding varies according to the season. And what he basically says is the seasonal deworming recommendations have more to do with when the eggs would develop into infective larvae in pasture. Remember that the non-infective larvae come out in the feces and fall to the ground in approximately 3 days, they become infective. But he says if it is winter and below 6 degrees Celsius or 43 degrees Fahrenheit, there is no development and therefore no point in reducing egg shedding through deworming. This is why we say that parasite control should occur during the active parasite transmission season. He adds, though, that further studies needed to determine the potential effects of different climates and locations on shedding patterns. Well, it's a big world out there, and a lot of us don't see those kind of cold temperatures. I've always said that if you live in a dry environment, that's what's going to kill the parasites. But everywhere I know in the United States, it's usually wet, not everywhere, but almost everywhere, certainly down here in South Florida. So I think it also interesting, he said foals began producing their own antibodies about 20 weeks after birth to Strongylosis vulgaris, which is a large roundworm that seems to infect a lot of horses. There's no evidence that pregnancy, foaling, or lactation affect a mare's parasite fecal egg counts. So he's pretty much saying that parasite fecal egg counts don't work. I think he would probably agree that the best parasite control you could ever have in horses is to clean the environment. Don't let them eat where they defecate. And I think that's always going to be and forever will be the be all and end all. I know you and I don't have a problem with parasites in our own bodies because we wash our hands and we eat in a dining room or area that's not where we defecate in. And that's the key secret. As long as you have a fence that's put up, that fence prevents the migration of the horse. And so he's going to continually eat where he defecates. The next article was Your Horse May Be Smarter Than You Think. And I thought this is kind of interesting. They took a bunch of horses and they did a screening test to see if these horses would follow somebody's finger pointing. And if they follow the finger and of the direction that somebody's pointing, they're included in the study. If they didn't, they were excluded. So they already selected for horses that knew that finger pointing meant, hey, there's something over there. And then they put a big screen up, and behind the screen, they had two buckets. In one bucket, they put a carrot. The other bucket, they didn't do anything. And then they had two people outside with the horse. One person was looking, could see which bucket had the carrot in it, and the other person turned her back, so she had no idea which bucket had the carrot in it. And then the screen was removed, so all the horse sees is these two buckets. And the horse was looking at the people to see which person would know which bucket had the carrot. And when the person who knew which bucket had the carrot pointed, and that horse went to that bucket, that was scored as a positive. Now, the other person who didn't see where the bucket went, that person was told to point to the bucket that didn't have the carrot. In other words, the other bucket. So the person who knew where it was would point to the left or the right bucket. And the person who didn't know where it was would just point to the other bucket. And the horse that was paying attention would know that the person who was looking and paying attention herself would know where the carrot was. And the horse, being no fool, said, I'm just going to go to that bucket where I know the carrot's going to be because I know this person's paying attention. Well, apparently this is common knowledge in dogs, but had never been tested in horses. So this is a big, big thing. They thought that this is really cool, that you could take your finger and point to where you want the horse to go, and the horse would trust you and say, oh, that person knows what she's doing, he or she is doing, so I'm going to follow that finger pointing. Of course, the researcher realized that horses that are told to go into a very dark horse trailer by somebody just pointing probably isn't going to work, that there's other things there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. People are looking at how the horse's brain works. Now, you and I, who work with horses, thousands and thousands of horses, over our lifetime, we already know most of these things. That I put my fingers around me. I look to the ground and I say, see this line? This is my space. Don't cross it. And a lot of horses say, oh, okay. And they just stay there. I talk to them in English if they're from an English speaking country, and they usually understand what I want to say. And I say it pretty clearly, and they say, okay. It's common knowledge for those people who work a lot. But in all research, people want to get data so they can explain and say to people that here's some data that proves that X amount of horses will understand you and do what you say. And I know I use hand gestures all the time. I'm like, go over to that side of the corner, push back, and they go back. I mean, everybody who works at Liberty horses know hand gestures work all the time. So, but again, it's nice that people are trying to get some data together. It keeps people going in the PhD programs. No offense to PhD people, we need them. I just find that in most research, the number of horses that we use and some of these models are, they're not strong enough. And you're going to get this from me all the time, that most of the research that is done on horses is a little light, but it's kind of fun to play around with this and see this. And I think most horse people say, hey, get out of here, move over there and stuff. The horse pretty much follows their energy more than anything else. But anyway, that was a cool study. Now they had a study about circles and soundness and why gait matters. This is on page 19. And apparently Michigan State University study suggests that when it comes to the force and pressure on a horse's hooves, their gait of travel matters. And I guess a lot of people don't put a lot of thought in it. You put a horse in a round pen and you ask it to go around. There are forces that are at work. This is why veterinarians like to see a horse on a circle, because we're going to unevenly load up a horse's limb, and we can exacerbate pain and show a lameness that way. But it's interesting that they realize that a horse at a walk is going to load that leg more than a horse that's not at a walk. And to me, that makes sense, because at the walk, it's a 4-beat gait, and they put their all their weight on their hoof. Whereas a 2-beat gait, like a trot, they're distributing that weight between two limbs. So it makes it less of a overall average force. And also, when you increase the movement speed, you're decreasing the time the hoof is spent on the ground. So again, when you're looking at averages and total sums, if the limb is not on the ground as long, it's not going to have as much force as one that stays on the ground longer. So, and then they also said the outside limb loads up more than the inside limb. And I thought that was interesting, because no mention here talked about friction, the stability of the ground that's underneath. So if it's in the sand arena and the horse is doing a circle, there's a lot of movement to the outside, because inertia of the circling horse is just going to push the horse out. It's going to step down, it's going to slide out. Whereas if the horse had sneakers on a gym floor, for instance, where you have good grip, or like on a tennis court, where the hoof hits the ground and doesn't slide, you're going to load up the outside more, because all that inertia, that centripetal force that forces up the things to the outside. I don't know why I'm saying this, and I immediately think of the lettuce washer, where you wash the lettuce, you put it in the spinner and you spin it, and all the water flies to the outside and dries the lettuce. Well, the same thing, your horse is being driven to the outside. So the outside limb is always going to have more force than the inside limb. But they didn't go into, well, they used a force plate on the horse's hoof that measured average forces. But I don't think this device measured the medial side versus the lateral side, because we know that whether it's the inside leg or the outside leg, it's going to load more on the inside edge than the outside edge. And this is why a horse that has a strained ligament in the fetlock, when you circle them, they can be sound in one direction and be dead lame in the other direction, because it's a unilateral lameness. So it was an interesting study. She concludes by saying, my personal takeaway as a horse trainer, as well as a scientist, is, quote, everything in moderation. The way that the horse travels when performing circular exercise is important. There's a lot of research showing increased lean angle means increased push off from the outside limb and potentially uneven limb loading. Well, yeah, the faster you go, the more the horse has to lean in, in a limb that's supposed to be vertical. As it moves more toward horizontal, you're going to be putting more lateral forces on there. And I discussed in the website, The Horse's Advocate, about vet.com, vector analysis, and how these force vectors apply weights and loads, not just in one direction, but in all directions. And she does say that, she says, we aren't talking about other forces such as rotational forces. But if you're doing a lot of work in a circle and you move the horse fast, you're going to put a bigger load on the outside limb. And that outside limb, as it goes from vertical to more horizontal, like a 30-degree angle, you're going to be putting a lot of side forces on there that can cause problems. I also talk about piezoelectric currents. They didn't talk about them in here, but piezoelectric currents are the currents that biological matter create when pressure is applied. So when you take a limb and you compress it or you twist it or you bend it, it's going to set up an electric charge that attracts calcium ions. Now, what's really interesting is if you take a look at any x-ray of any bone in you or your horse, you're going to find out that it's not a 2x4. It's not an I-beam. It is a curved structure with protuberances. And what causes all those accumulations of calcium in a curved fashion is the forces applied. This is why astronauts go in zero gravity, when they don't put any weight on these limbs, they basically turn into jello, if they're up there long enough. So they constantly have to be applying a load. That's why you see all the astronauts working. It's called disuse atrophy, and it affects the bones, the ligaments, the tendons, the connective tissue of the joints. Everything goes away. But piezoelectric currents also work in the opposite direction, whereas when you use them more and more in a certain specific pattern, you're going to lay down more and more strength tissue. When somebody, a hand doctor, radiographed my hands, and he was looking at one specific finger that had a bent, a crook in it, he says, "Oh my, you use your hands a lot. They're hardworking hands." And I said, "Well, tell me more." And every joint of my fingers have these spurs on each side where the collateral ligament attaches. And he says, that just shows me that as you work them harder, you're going to lay down more calcium to make sure that those ligaments stay attached to your bone. Now, everyone thinks of bone spurs as being negative, but in this case, they're a positive result of using these hands to hold on to horses and to grip the hand floats. So that's a great example of piezoelectric currents. So if you want to lunge your horse in a small arena and you do it rapidly right off the bat, you're going to create damage. But if you do that over and over and over again for years, your horse is going to develop all the materials it needs to prevent that horse from breaking down. This is why I believe in LSD. LSD is not the hallucinogenic drug. LSD is long, slow distance. And long, slow distance is a great way to train and build up the body through piezoelectric currents to lay down the tissues it needs to strengthen against the support that you've got. So this is why older people are now loading up their structures, their bones, either through resistance bands or some sort of non-stressful loading, because your body will adapt to that load through piezoelectric currents. But they don't talk about that. And that's why I'm talking about it right now, so you guys can learn. So I'm going to jump through this next section, which is a really good section, but I don't want to talk about it. Building trust and partnership. Trust between rider and horse is the foundation for everything else. And here's a person sitting cross-legged backwards on their horse. And, I know you guys are going to laugh, but most of you know I drive a Tesla. I've got over 250,000 miles on it. So I've done a little bit of driving with it, 257,000 miles as I speak. And what's interesting is I don't have to hold on to the steering wheel. So I guess I can sit on a horse and face backwards and not worry about it. Or I can drive and, read a book or, eat a sandwich. But when that thing happens, where all of a sudden that chunk of tire that came off the truck is sitting smack dab in the middle of your car, of your lane, I should say, you need to be able to control the vehicle and move around it so you don't hit it and damage your car. Same thing with a horse. Yes, you can sit on a horse backwards with your arms, your legs crossed. Fine, you can do that. That does not mean that you have a great connection with a horse. It just means that your horse could care less. He trusts you. I get it. But I would never have a picture of me doing that. I'll never forget this gal. She claims she's a great horseman, and she was sitting on her saddle And instead of having both legs on, one leg on each side, she had both legs on one side. She had crossed her legs and she's sitting there on her phone talking. And there's 100 horses around her. And I said, this gal is going to die. I just know she's going to die. But she had all this confidence. And all I've got to say is law number 1 of the 10 irrefutable laws of horsemanship that I wrote, a horse can kill you. And law number 2 is the horse that'll kill you is your own, because you never know when it's going to happen. And a subset of that is whenever you are on a horse or around a horse, working on a horse, yeah, great. You know what you're doing and you know your way around this horse. And the horse knows that if it steps out of line, you're going to get angry at everything. But one day there's some child watching you. And that child is going to learn by watching what you do. And they're going to have and develop quickly your bad habits. And they are going to get hurt. And they may die. And it's your fault. So I say that whenever you work with a horse, I don't care if it's the slightest thing, you should always be adhering to the rules. Always consider that every horse can hurt you. Don't be afraid. Be confident, but be consistent. So when I drive my car, I try to keep my hands on the steering wheel at all times. And I try to be looking at the windshield at all times. Yes, it's nice that the car steers itself. Yes, it's nice that the horse almost always never has a problem. But when it does, you have to be ready for it. Okay, on page 49, 4849, it says, make summer a breeze. This season presents 5 key challenges for horse keepers. Here's what they are and how to meet them. Okay, challenge number 1 is heat and humidity. And they talk about how hot temperatures can affect horses, especially if they have long hair coats or you're working them hard or they're just in that transition in the springtime or it's the middle of summer and they're used to, cold winters. How do they cope? And nowhere in here do they talk about non-sweating the way I talk about it. They do have a whole section in dark green that says, when no sweat is time to worry. And they talk about anhydrosis in horses. And they said to immediate help, move the horse to a cool location, drench in cold water, call your vet, manage the condition with long-term, resolve to invest in extra stall fans, water buckets, perhaps misters. Then they get into some really gobbledygook, all right? It says, besides addressing an affected horse's environment, supplementation of targeted electrolytes based on irregularities identified in blood analysis can sometimes help jumpstart the sweating. Okay, I don't know why. Nobody knows why. They say that they think it's because of triggered by an overstimulation of the sweat glands by stress hormones and hot human conditions. More gobbledygook. Nobody knows why, but I do know that horses that are non-sweaters, when you take them off grain, in about 3 to 4 days, they start sweating again. I'm just saying that gut inflammation plus heat plus humidity, and it's 90 degrees times 90% humidity, or add, not multiply, but add is 180. And at 180 or higher, there's a good chance your horse is going to stop sweating. If you decrease or eliminate grain from their diet, and they don't need grain when it's hot, there's no purpose in feeding grain to a horse in the middle of summer where it's hot. Just do that and see if your non-sweater starts sweating again. I think most horses that do that start sweating. At minimum, they start to become damp, even though they've always been dry. But I think that's really important. They do go on to say summer feeding considerations. They basically say in summer grass, just decrease the amount of hay. In fact, eliminate hay if they don't need it. Remember, hay is last summer's grass that's been cut and put into a bale, and it's there to supplement your feeding programs in the winter when it's really cold out and there's no ability for the horse to get his face on grass, which means basically if there's snow cover. So remember that dormant winter grass is high in cellulose. When a horse starts eating grass that's high in cellulose and low in starch, they're going to switch their mitochondria over to consuming that cellulose, converting it by the gut colon bacteria into short chain fatty acids. So it becomes a high fat diet, which has 20 to 28 times more energy than sugar ever will. These horses become satiated. So you'll see them out in the winter pasture just standing there doing nothing. That's normal. Here we are thinking, oh my gosh, we need to get our horses iPhones or TVs to watch, or, well, we can't do either one of those. So let's feed them more hay because we want to make them look busy. And so they start eating hay, which is high in sugar content. So they never switch over to using fat. And so they start to gain fat, and it disrupts their normal gut microbiome that's supposed to have a winter period of hormesis, which is that downtime to start healing the gut. And if you don't let them have that winter time off and allow them to lose some of their body fat, they will continue to keep their body fat, continue to have insulin resistance, continue to have muscle loss, and other diseases that come from that. So back to summer considerations. Challenge 3, hydration. Keep your horses hydrated. That's a no-brainer. Then they say add some salt. That's great. I don't like adding salt to the food. I don't have any proof, but in humans, they do know that adding salt to a dehydrated human will cause the conversion of glucose into fructose, which leads to increased uric acid production, which leads to inflammation of the kidneys and inflammation of the pancreas, which leads to increased blood pressure and hypertension, as well as decreased production of insulin, which increases the chance of you getting type 2 diabetes. This is why people say don't eat salt if you have high blood pressure. In reality, if you take a horse that's dehydrated and you put something salty in there, you could be triggering the same reaction. I don't know if it's true. I don't think anybody's looking into it. But if you just leave it as a salt lick to have them have it at their leisure and make sure they have plenty of water to drink down, you at least don't have to worry about that. So I don't agree with adding salt directly to the food. I just had this conversation with somebody. They said, I like to give electrolytes to my horse. And because he sweats, he foams up and he sweats a lot. And I'm like, okay, so why not just salt lick? Well, sometimes he just doesn't want to eat the salt lick. And I know that he's losing all these electrolytes. I keep reminding them that a lot of electrolytes that these horses needs are found in the grass that they eat, in the pasture, in the hay, and certainly in the water that's pumped out of the ground. There's tons of minerals in that. And if you have a mined salt lick and you put it there and the horse licks it every once in a while, he'll be fine. The horse knows it's there. Yes, some horses don't, but I don't see an electrolyte deficiency. Everyone's worried about it. I just don't see it, with the exception of thumps, which is synchronous diaphragmatic flutter in horses. And those are horses that are working hard. They're sweating like crazy, and they get an electrolyte imbalance. So they start to hiccup. The diaphragm starts to contract with every beat of their heart. And that solution is to add some electrolytes, and the horse immediately just normalizes. Challenge 4 is insects. Yes, we talked about insects in the last episode, where we talked about having increased protein, so you increase epithelium, repair of the skin, the largest organ in the body. And once you do that and you get the immune system to stop fighting the battles in the inflamed gut and make themselves more available to the inflammatory processes that are coming from the insect bites, between those two efforts, you probably get a horse that's going to be a lot more comfortable outside with the flies. This is what I've seen in horses that are on a high protein diet, meaning at least half a gram or more per pound of body weight of high quality protein. They tend to do well. And again, no inflammatory ingredients such as grain and byproducts and supplements and extenders and balancers. I know there's a lot of food companies and nutritional supplements out there that don't like me. I get it. I understand that. But I'm here for just the horse. That's it. I'm not here to put you guys out of business. That's not my goal. I just want the horses to do the best they can. And I feel like they're just not doing as well now as they did 50 years ago when I first started with horses. This is why I'm seeing probably at least 8 diseases that weren't in the textbooks in the 1980s. Broken teeth, EOTRH, kissing spine, DSLD, top lines going away, suspensory ligaments. What's another one? White line disease. these sleep disorder, now it's becoming more popular. All these sleep disorders, Cushing's disease, every horse seems to have Cushing's, metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, laminitis in horses instead of fat ponies. I mean, I'm seeing all this stuff that back in the 1970s just wasn't happening. And you don't need a lot of diagnostics to see this. You don't need it to see drop fetlocks. You don't need to see inflamed and decaying incisors, front teeth of horses. Just lift their lips and you can see it. And tooth fractures, you didn't have to have any fancy x-rays to see this. Yet they just weren't in the textbooks back in the 1980s. So a lot of things are happening. Their fifth and final challenge was hard footing. And they say that regular farrier rate, et cetera, but nowhere in here did they say, hey, add some more protein, because the hoof is 100% protein. And if you have good, high quality protein, you're going to have a stronger hoof that'll do just fine on hard footing. Nowhere do they say that. And as I go from farm to farm, I talk to farriers and I ask them, so what makes that stinky smell when you stick that hot shoe on there? And they sit there and they're like, I don't know. I said, well, that's the sulfur that's in the methionine. It's not really methionine. It's cysteine that's making up 24% of the hoof. It's the disulfide bonds of the sulfur that's creating the strength of the hoof. And your hoof has got curved walls instead of being solid and strong. You've got breaking up hooves. You got cracks that are occurring. You've got seedy toe. You got white line disease. You got all these things that are occurring, mainly because the hoof is not being fed properly. And I ask these farriers and veterinarians, how do you feed the hoof to become healthy? And they look at me like, I don't know. I think they need vitamins. They need biotin, don't they? Biotin is vitamin B7, and that's made by the gut bacteria. If you're feeding horse correctly, it should have plenty of biotin. So yeah, you can feed biotin. You're going to see some improved results, but you're also going to see improved results if you start feeding the proteins, the amino acids that they need. Almost every hoof supplement out there has methionine in it. They say that methionine is one of the 3 limiting amino acids, along with threonine and lysine, meaning that it's missing in most horses' diets. And so they're adding methionine. Methionine is converted by the liver into cysteine, and that makes up 24% of the hoof. Now, soybean meal has methionine in it, and it does just as good a job. Plus, it brings in the other minerals. I mean, I can say, amino acids. I can say that methionine makes up 24%, but the next question you ask, well, what makes up the other 76%? Well, it's all the other amino acids that make up the hair follicle of your hair, keratin, or the hoof. And if you are supplying all the other amino acids, you're going to have a very strong hoof. That's just the way it is. And like I've said before, you start feeding soybean meal 1 pound per day per 1,200 pound horse, and you're going, yes, I'll repeat that. I heard you. 1 pound of soybean meal per day per 1,200 pound horse. And the reason I picked 1,200 is 1,200 is easily divisible. So if you have a 600 pound horse, that's half a pound of soybean meal. If you have an 800 pound horse, it's 3/4 of a pound of soybean meal. If you have a 300 pound mini, it's 1/4 of a pound of soybean meal. And that will give you minimum amounts of high quality protein in addition to 10% hay if you're feeding that at about at 1.5 to 2% of their body weight. So a 1,200 pound horse should be getting maybe 24 pounds of hay at 10% protein. Is going to get approximately a pound of protein out of that that's bioavailable because it's 50% absorbable. Add to that another 174 grams of high quality protein out of a pound of soybean meal. Don't get worried. All this is written down. You can go to my site, thehorsesadvocate.com, and you can look up all this information, all this math. I'm just throwing it out there to you if you want to know what the data is. But basically, 1 pound of soybean meal per 1,200 pound horse per day. And if you want to double that, that's fine. Just put it into 2 feedings. You put anything into 2 feedings, it's fine. You don't want to overwhelm the system with a lot of protein. 1 pound should be fine for a horse to eat at one time. And don't put it in a scoop and say, oh, I think it's like a cup. No, weigh it. Get your scale out, weigh it, then take your scoop. And once you have a pound in there, draw a marker line right there and say, okay, this line, I know that I fill up with soybean meal, I'm going to have a pound in there. And then you can use your favorite scoop and fill it up to that line and say, okay, I've got a pound. It's that simple. But stop taking shortcuts. It's really important. I know I'm hollering at all of you listening to this, but I've heard everybody's excuses, and I keep saying it's a pound. Well, I thought he said a cup. No, I said a pound. Well, isn't a cup a pound? I mean, wait a minute. It's 8 ounces, right? That's fluid ounces. That's a cup of feathers is not a cup of cement. It's the density. You've got to weigh it. Okay. Oh, good grief. Okay, I'm almost at the end of Equus. I'm at the consultants. There's 3 questions. What's the best way to control marish behavior in mares? And this woman who answers it is the DVM and a diplomat in theogenology, and that's great. She certainly knows her stuff. And she talks about all the hormones that you can use to help modify the mare's behavior, but nowhere in here do they talk about nutrition, because I find that a lot of marish horses are they're just nutritionally upset. They're got other issues going on. They've got social issues in the barn. They've got a bad person in there. There's so many other things. Yes, you can add Regimate or some sort of progesterone compound. You can add other things. You can breed the mare and get her pregnant. There's a dozen things you can do on the hormonal end. But remember, all hormones are made by proteins. Oh, there I go again. I'm sorry. I've beaten you guys up enough. And remember, all the grains that you feed these mares, if you just take them off grain for 2 weeks and then see if the horse still has marish behavior and have her go through a couple of cycles, maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised and you won't have to spend as much money. Okay, the second thing is, why do I keep seeing more flies on my farm? And I think that's interesting. She talks about, I guess, basically climate change. And I can understand that. I see it. I mean, there are more flies down here in South Florida. I think flies are also being included in cars and trucks that travel, and then they're let out, 3-5 states away. So there's this super migration of flies. I don't know. I think that I think it's a fascinating subject to understand why flies are more prevalent. I also think that we've got denser populations of horses on our property. We don't clean up the the fecal load. So we have a lot of organic material throughout the farm. We don't, so it breeds more. They have more places to breed. We have more standing water because your pasture was good until the next door neighbor sold, and they have 10 units, 10 houses put up, and they put in fields and drains and they change the water flow. And now you have soft spots, wet spots in your pasture, which accumulates more flies. There's dozens and dozens of reasons. And I think you need a really good entomologist to go out there and assess your property and say, look, this is what you got to do. You got to clean up the environment. You got to put more drainage tiles and make it more dry. And then you can get the fly controls of your choice. I think the fly predators work pretty well. And then finally, can vision problems cause a horse to spook more? And it was interesting. They talk about routine eye exam, and most veterinarians can do a pretty thorough eye exam. And her veterinarian, of the person asking the question, didn't notice anything in the eyes. And they said that there's a couple of different eye exams that can be done, a streak test. I've never heard of that. They said most horses are either farsighted or nearsighted. Okay, fine. And then they had some other ideas where you can cover up one eye and then throw cotton balls at it and see if the horse shies away and can see it or not. But it doesn't help you get a horse doing so you have a diagnosis, but there doesn't seem to be a cure. I mean, if you have vitreous floaters, or if you have a cataract formation, or if you have a horse that's nearsighted and is having trouble seeing far away, nobody's making glasses, nobody's making contact lenses that are, reasonable for you to use in these horses. So what do? And I found that nobody ever addresses that thing. They said, if he's spooky, basically he's spooky. Again, I'm going to throw out there, just because you guys know I'm going to do this, make sure that the diet is good. Make sure that the horse isn't spooking because he doesn't feel good. Like that horse I worked on the other day that was just not happy as I floated on him. And I said to him, the owner, I said, your horse is on grain, isn't he? And the owner said, yes, of course he's on grain. I said, well, this behavior is all because of grain. And if you want a more willing partner, more calm and level-headed, make sure that you take the grain away and give it a 2-week challenge and see if the behavior changes. So I think that would be something kind of cool to do. And last, there's a really cool article about this spotted Appaloosa who did a dressage test for Paul McCartney back in 2017, I guess. That's just interesting because Paul McCartney's widow, is that right? His wife Linda was a horse fan. I did her horse's teeth for years before the horse passed away. Never saw Paul McCartney. He never came out and thanked me for floating that horse's teeth. Very difficult horse to work on, by the way. But this lady rode her Appaloosa in a dressage performance inside a church as a ceremony for the late Linda McCartney, and Paul was very grateful. So I thought that was kind of an interesting article, fun to read. And then on the very last page, called the back page, they talk about a woman named Caitlin Gooch in North Carolina who has started a program called, let's see, I want to get it right. Saddle Up and Read. And she found that literacy is the number one cause, or illiteracy, I should say, is the number one cause of incarceration of people. They said, according to the National Assessment of Adult Literacy, 2/3 of students who aren't reading proficiently by 4th grade will end up in jail or on welfare. So this woman, Caitlin Gooch, decided she's going to do something about it because she loves to read, and she's also written a book. And she wants to get kids out there enjoying horses and reading to them. So these kids come out and they start reading books to these horses, and they might not even actually be reading, but they're showing the pictures and they're getting interested in opening up books and associating this beautiful connection they're making with these little ponies with reading. And I think it's a fascinating way to make the two come together. And I wanted to reach out and say thank you. Her website is saddleupandread.org. Saddle Up, SADDLEUPANDREAD, saddleupandread.org. Might be something you guys might want to look into. And I think that's great. I think all children, no matter what their socioeconomic background is, would benefit from reading. I've been reading more now since I've started these podcasts than I ever have as a vet student. And back in vet school days, I did wear glasses, haven't worn glasses, and now I'm back to reading glasses because I can't see quickly enough to read fast enough. So that's my assessment of the Equus magazine. I hope you enjoyed this podcast of me going through the magazine, getting some insights. I find that a lot of their information is good, but it certainly is biased or agenda driven, and they like to get certain things come across, and I like to give a point counterpoint way through it. So I'm glad you hung with me for this episode, and I'm going to try to put something else together. I've got so many other magazines I can read and journals and come to you with some ideas. I did go see a conference that was put on by a company that makes feeds, and I'd like to do another podcast on that and give you my take on what they said there. All right, this is Doc T. I'm going to hang up now and I'll let you go. I appreciate you stopping by, and please spread the word. Let people know about this podcast. Give a 5-star review to whatever platform you like to listen to. Apple seems to be all in it all for podcasts. Also Spotify. So if you could go there, take the time and do that. Let me know how these things are going. If there's anything else you want me to talk about on them. Thank you very much. Doc T out. Bye.
Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's 2 reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.